you need to be almost undetectable,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to be an annoying like pop-up in the face of a user who's trying to accomplish a critical task by their next
I was
meeting.
gonna say, like, I've used Miro in screen share mode in the middle of a meeting with, like, 20 expensive people on the call. The last thing I would want to have is for there to be a pop-up that goes, "Hey, it looks like you're trying to do this." And once again, welcome to the Digital Customer Success Podcast with me, Alex Turkovich. So glad you could join us here today and every week as I seek out and interview leaders and practitioners who are innovating and building great scaled CS programs. My goal is to share what I've learned and to bring you along with me for the ride so that you get the insights that you need to build and evolve your own digital CS program. If you'd like more info, want to get in touch, or sign up for the latest updates, go to digitalcustomersuccess.com. For now, let's get started. This is episode 38 of the Digital Customer Success Podcast. Welcome back. It's so great to have you. I feel like I say that this is a great episode every episode, but isn't that kind of the thing you do as the host of one of these things? That said, today's episode is really, really great. We have Dee Kapila on, which, if you don't know her, she is head of global, I'm going to butcher this, global scaled customer experience, I believe it is, at Miro, which, a lot of us use, or at least are aware of. So she has under her purview not just digital customer success, but also customer education, and talks a lot about her cross-collaborative work at Miro and the tooling and all that kind of stuff. Just a lot of really cool, tactical, great advice and insight into her world. She gave a really cool talk at Pulse last year, all about how PLG and SLG, so product-led growth and sales-led growth, should work together in harmony to serve the customer journey. Just really cool stuff, super bright. And we'd been trying to connect for a little while, so I'm so glad we finally got her on the show. One quick note of warning, I guess. My audio is not the best in this episode. It jumps around a little bit. I don't know, my computer was revolting against me that day when we recorded it or something. I've edited through most of it, but just know once in a while you'll hear my audio kind of do some weird stuff. Use your context clues and power through, kind of like I did. But I hope you enjoy this episode with Dee Kapila, because I sure did. Dee, I want to welcome you to the Digital Customer Success Podcast. It's awesome to have you here. It's been a long time coming. I've been looking forward to this conversation for frickin' ever, so welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Love the podcast. Love you. Love digital CS. Love it all. So excited to be here.
Okay, we're done. That's great. Good interview. I appreciate that. As is normal, you do a little bit of research on your guests and you dig into really. Actually, somebody recently said something interesting that if you're looking through somebody's history on LinkedIn, it's not considered stalking; it's considered research. But if you're looking through somebody's history on like Facebook and Instagram, that's considered stalking. So I'm not going to say that I stalked you. I'm going to say that I researched. And a couple of things jumped out at me. The first is that we have a lot of similarities of, you have some history in learning and development. I do as well. We both put in some time at Dell. You've had some implementation kind of roles, as have I. So there's a lot of kind of cool, congruent stuff there. But the one thing that jumped out at me, so my mom spent, years as a GM of a public radio station. Was a classical music host as well. And I noticed you spent a considerable amount of time at KUT. For those of you who aren't in the Austin area, that's Austin's local public radio behemoth. And so I wanted to just pick your brain real quick on what that was like, because I think you were kind of the web. so in 2009, 2011, you were their web and mobile products person, according to LinkedIn, which means that you were probably like the tech guru at
Oh my gosh,
Community, right?
that is so. I love your research. I love all the similarities, and we've got a sidebar about your mom because I'm sure
Mm,
we like we know a lot of the same people because public media is a small world, and
yeah.
it's when you're in it and when you work in it for years. I mean, you love it and you never really leave. Like you're public radio, for life, and public
Yeah.
radio nerd for life, and so
Yeah.
that's definitely like a big part of my heart, but. Yeah, so it was sort of a dual kind of a role. So it was really, you could think about it as product management before that was really a thing, right? This was
Yeah.
when we were trying to figure out, traditional media is dying, we're moving to the web, but what's the business model, right? And how do you engage with the audience, and where are they, and where do we need to be besides just radio, right? And so we were kind of putting a lot of that stuff onto the web for the first time. So that was like a key component of the role, is like working with the newsrooms, with human interest reporters, and figuring out, okay, how do we do video?
Hmm.
And what does video look and feel like for public radio, right? And so that was a key component of it, while also figuring out, like, okay, streaming services, blah, 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 all of that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so I think in that way, you got to be the technical person, but like what we back in that time used to sort of trying to glamorize ourselves as like creative technologists,
Sure.
right? And I think a lot of people across the industry were in these sorts of roles where they were trying to bring things to the web and trying to figure out, okay, like if the business model includes advertising, what does that look
Yeah.
like? If the business model includes subscriptions or donations, like what does that look like, right? Where are you going to drop your car off on the web if that comes to mind for KUT, right? Like,
Right.
so it's sort of, it was that whole space. But I think, there's so much deep connective tissue between digital success, between all of the things that we're trying to do to scale a CS organization, and some of the lessons that I learned there, that I think of it as like a beautiful on ramp back into
Yeah.
CS. Because I started in CS before it was CS, went into this world, and then kind of came back into it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is so cool. And I think that, that kind of background in tech and like product, and then combined with the education bit that, that you have a deep history in as well, and learning and enablement, and really like customer education. That to me, that forms the basis of what a digital program's all about. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you're productizing this content in a way that makes it easily accessible at the right time, but also, enables your teams to use it in an easy way. So I would imagine, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but I would imagine, if you where you are today, which is to say you've kind of morphed from education back into CS and leading the scaled programs at Miro, that has all kind of come together for you full circle, maybe.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and yes, and I would say that these are all critical components of CS, right? And I think CS,
Hmm.
is a newer function if we really think about when it started, and has
Hmm.
gone through a lot of evolution. And I think is figuring out ways to put a lot of things together. I think as our customer needs change, their expectations change, they're driving us really, right, to do that. And so when we think about, again, going back to sort of like public radio, when you think about what that service is that you're providing to your audience back in public radio land, like what is the service that you're providing to your customers in SaaS? And what is CS's role in providing that service specifically,
Hmm.
right? Because CS isn't providing the service alone, but what is our specific role? And that is, a really strategic blend of these things, of education, of sort of orchestration that we do on the digital success side, thinking about support in strategic ways, thinking about all of, obviously, what our high touch CS teams do, what professional services does, so we're talking CX now, right?
Hmm.
Everything
Yeah.
blends together. And that's really how, I mean, digital successes is a core component of my team's portfolio, but we're really about scaling CX overall, because I think that's really where all of this is moving to, right?
Hmm.
We're not going to create silos within CX. We're trying to solve for silos across organization. across our organization. So what are the key pieces that are done extremely well by these amazing dedicated teams in CX? And then how do you have a function or a team that can scale across all of that? And that's really what
Hmm.
we're looking at doing, with, of course, digital being that orchestrating kind of conductor function of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And this probably lends into kind of my next question, and the question that I basically ask all of my guests, which is to say, you know, collecting everybody's elevator pitch, so to speak, of digital CS. Um, and I have a feeling yours is going to be a little bit unique, but again, I won't put words in your mouth. So if you had to explain to somebody in 10 to 30 seconds, what is digital CS? What would you say?
I changed my answer for that. I would say every 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
And so I'll give you a couple of components of it, and then eventually maybe we'll stitch it together.
Sure.
One of the ways that I really like that my leader for digital success on my team, Lara Johnson, describes it as really we are the system, we are the CSM of record
Mm,
in a digital capacity, right? And I love that because it's so much simpler than I think what so many other people say about digital success. And what I hear when we start to talk about things like da 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 da, at scale, at the right time, at the right data, at the right, people are just like, well, we do that in marketing, or we do that in product, or
mhm.
we do that in this team, we do that in this team. So it's really hard to cut to the core of what it is that you're trying to do, particularly in the initial part of when you're like getting a digital success team off the ground, or
Yeah.
when you're getting a digital success program off the ground. It's very hard to sort of like explain to people what you're trying to do. So I think the way that Laura describes is probably the best way to cut
Hmm.
to the heart of it. And I think when you start to mature the program, that's really when you can bring in some of this additional terminology and say, okay, look, we're automating success milestones across the delivery
Yeah.
journey or the value delivery journey for the customer, right? And that could look different depending on if you're serving a digital only book of business, or if digital is a strategy for all CS segments, or if it's both, which is ideally what you're
Hmm.
doing. You're doing kind of a blend of both those things to explain to people who are like, oh, tell us more about digital success. What is it? I'm like, let me tell you what the industry definition is, and
Right.
break that down. And then subsequent slides will like break that down. And at the end, you kind of come back to that definition. And that's
Hmm.
because when you hear it, it's a mouthful and you're like, that sounds a little bit jargony. But when you break it down, those are the best words that we have in the English language actually to communicate what digital success is trying to do.
You
It
know,
just doesn't make it easy.
that's so interesting because I find myself doing that. Like I'll throw out kind of like my own definition, and then I'll be like, but let me unpack that for you a little bit. And then you come back to it and you're like, okay, does that make sense? Now does that make sense? Because it's
We have this unpacking problem for some reason,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's like, and we're supposed to be the ones that communicate this stuff very clearly, right?
Yeah, I know. And that's I think that's the irony, right? And it's so funny. So like I think okay, I found it. So the thought leader kind of lens, and this is a quote from somewhere, and it's brilliant, but again, it takes breaking down. It's digital CS is a data-driven methodology for creating values for customers at scale by using purpose-built tools that facilitate a personalized customer experience regardless of segment or journey stage. So that's a
Sure.
paragraph. There's a lot of really critical bits and pieces of it. But when you're
Hmm.
talking like practitioner to
Hmm.
practitioner outside of CS, it's very difficult to
Yep,
grasp.
it is. And what's interesting is as you probably know, on the website, I've been collecting all everybody's definition, turned it into a word map or whatever. And what's interesting is that definition is kind of encapsulates bits and pieces from everybody's little, everybody's definition, and it goes to show that what somebody thinks of as digital CS has a lot to do with also with how they're operating, what their history is, and what's kind of fed into that, and how their organization views CS as well. um,
Yeah, and to clarify, that's not my definition. That is like,
right,
yeah,
sure, yeah,
that
yeah.
one. Like I ripped that from. I'll have to give you the attribution later. But
Hmm.
yeah, it is all the bits and pieces that I think we have, as doers of this thing, accumulated over time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. um, Going perhaps a little bit deeper on something you said earlier, um, in relation to digital CS as it pertains to other organizations within the company, because I see this. There's no secret that digital CS is kind of a collection of skills and things and processes that other organizations have been doing for a while. You mentioned marketing. I think product could fit, in product kind of stuff. And there's a number of other things too, but it's kind of like those things, all focused on that outcomes journey or the customer journey or whatever you want to call it. Right. And that's where I think the role of somebody leading these things becomes particularly tricky, because it can be kind of seen as, hey, I'm stepping on your toes, or this is your thing versus my thing, and there's kind of like this ownership thing. And I think it takes a really open-minded and collaborative structure to support those things. And and at the end of the day, it's like, whether you do that or I do that, doesn't really matter, as long as it's coordinated, looks kind of similar or whatnot. But I wanted to get your take on how a digital strategy kind of fits in cross-functionally.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think to me, everything just starts with culture, really, for all of this stuff, because digital success is newer than a lot of the folks that we're going to be collaborating with cross-functionally.
Yeah.
And to your point, they have been doing these things, right, for a little while. So who are we all of a sudden to come up and say, hey, we're doing this thing. It's never been invented. We're inventing it. And it's like, I would be upset too, right? And so I think there is occasionally a little bit of that unintentionally can come across. But I think what I've experienced, and this is sort of, I think you want to build together with those teams from the beginning, is probably the first thing I would say. But I think you also want to kind of sit down and co-own that journey together. Like, to your point, what I love about what you said is you're starting with a journey, which to me, it's like you want to start with the customer at the center of everything, right? And I think what you'll find when you sit down with some of your counterparts in product marketing, sales, what have you, is that we all have one sort of different versions of a customer journey that are a little bit more about internal processes and how our teams go to market,
right,
than they really are what the customer is experiencing. And the second thing is that we all have different metrics. And so those journeys morph actually to optimize for those metrics. And those metrics are internal business metrics. They're not customer metrics. And so again, is it really a customer experience, or is it really a customer journey that we're rallying around? And so I think that is a role that we can play as, a CX org or CS org, is to come in and say, here's a customer's journey from their experience. And let's kind of rally all of our stuff that we have around this. And then you want to audit that, right? And you want to figure out, all right, whether it's auditing overall programs that seem to be duplicative in nature, or maybe they have some sort of like a little bit of a Venn diagram and they can both stay, but they need to have their distinct kind of, value props, all the way to a level of detail of like, what notifications are they getting, right? Do you have a governance model in place to make sure it doesn't feel like different departments at your company are talking to your customer? It's like these things need to be mapped out, because you really don't know your customer experience otherwise. Like, I think we might look at some data and get some indication. We might get some qualitative results or conversational inputs from customers that make us think we know what they're experiencing. But until you do this level of detail, like top-down analysis of it, you don't. And I think that's those two places are where I would start building together. It's really rallying around that journey and doing an audit with your cross-functional partners, and then starting to talk about overlap, team competencies, and how do we all get together and do this together. I think the third thing I would say that just kind of dawned on me, but this is something you and I have talked about this before, and I think looking at your go-to-market model, looking at your business model, and figuring out where the gaps are and plugging those is, I think, where a scaled team or a digital success team is particularly effective. So, the two models that are really, that everyone talks about these days is like product-led growth, so PLG, and then sales-led growth or product-led sales, or either like one of those three. And when you actually put the tenets of those models together, you start to realize where each of them is really effective and where each of them either hands off to the other or is actually missing something
Yeah.
that you can plug and fill. And so that's something else that we did. And again, an audit really kind of helps with this, is it helps you figure out, all right, what are our customers actually missing and how do we bring that to the table? Now, I'm going to argue with what I said earlier and say, like, if you don't have the ability to like build together and like you've got, folks in other departments, they want to work with you, but they just don't have the time right now. And they're like, look, go do your thing. Let's come back in a couple quarters and figure it out. I would start
Yeah.
in the gaps. I would start in the gaps in the areas where you've clearly identified no one at your company is tackling these problems, and try to, get some traction there before you go and work with your partners. So that's my
Yeah.
very long-winded
It's
answer
so
to
great.
your question.
And I do feel like there is, when folks were talking about digital customer success like 2 years ago, it was like, okay, we just need to cover this segment.
Mm.
More recently, obviously, it's shifted to, okay, it's just, strategy, not a segment. And I think everybody kind of gets that now. Um, where I kind of feel like people are starting to shift a little bit more is this notion of getting this program implemented in such a way to where it's not a CS thing. It's like everybody's doing CS in relation to what their remit is. And I know I'm just completely repeating what you just said, but I think it's a profound shift in mentality where you're not just talking about, okay, this email needs to go out then, this email needs to go out then. It's like, okay, there's a bunch of stuff that happens pre-sale. There's a bunch of stuff that happens in the renewal cycle that don't live in CS, but all of that stuff needs to inform your processes. There's a bunch of stuff that happens in finance. Hey, guess what? That should be part of the journey. There's a bunch of stuff that happens in product and support. Holy cow. Like, it's almost like a return to what we used to call like voice of the customer committee, and like where you try to like wrangle everybody, but it's I think we're finally getting a little bit more programmatic about it, to where having these cross-functional conversations, or at least you should be. And I think there's a cautionary
100%.
bit here too, though, because there are probably the number one question I get is like, okay, this is great. I want to go do this. Where the fuck do I start? Like, it's like there's a lot of stuff I could do, or there's a lot of stuff I need to do, but where do I start? And yes, you should have those cross-functional conversations. And yes, you should start with kind of like mapping out a high-level journey and knowing generally where your customers need to go. But then also it's just about, failing fast and getting some stuff in place while you map out all that other stuff, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And do them in parallel, right? It's like it's sort of the way you would balance a healthy portfolio, right? When you're working on anything, on launching anything new,
Yeah.
you've got to get some quick wins. You've got to get things to market quickly. And while you're doing that, you're building a solid foundation that is going to sustain you for quarters and quarters and years and years and years and years to come, right? You can't just like do the quick win stuff and not focus on the bigger picture. You can't just focus on the bigger picture stuff and like never execute anything. And so it's always about looking at like your Starbucks cup sizes quarter over quarter of like initiatives and being like, okay, what are my like talls, my grandes, and my ventis to get digital success off the ground? And making sure that those are in balance and in harmony. And I think, are there big business problems that people are complaining about that you could make a dent in right away? Like that's, to me, that's a place to start while you start on that overall journey map, right? Like, and looking at that journey, it's like, do those things concurrently. And I think you don't need a ton of resources to do it. In fact, that's pretty anti what like a digital success team is all about, really, right? But I think you can be really smart and you can do both.
Yeah. I'm going on a complete tangent here and Googling while you're talking, because you just reminded me of that hilarious Paul Rudd rant about the sizes of cups or whatever it was. I forget
Oh, you
where it
have to say,
was.
I don't think I've seen this.
Yeah, it's like, talking about how venti actually means 20 and all this kind of stuff is like, it's really funny. I'll
Oh
send it to
man,
you.
we're gonna have to edit that out then. But yeah, I should have just said t-shirt sizes, right?
Yeah, well, there you go. Exactly. Although, isn't XL really an XL, and is a large really a large? I don't know.
I know, right? You can. It's just it's everywhere.
And no, we're not editing that out.
Fair enough.
So tying back to what you said earlier, you were at Pulse this year, the Pulse conference this year.
Yes.
You were a speaker, and your talk was all about this notion that there is no PLG or SLG. It's like a, neither are dead. And I love the analogies, but the link to the talk will be in the show notes. So if anybody wants to go see it, it's hilarious and great, and the analogies are on point.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
but you really clearly articulated this notion of, together these strategies are like the recipe and the killer for how we should be engaging our customers on both kind of like the machine level, but then also, let's not forget about the human element of things as well. Do you want to give us like a quick cliff notes of what that talk is, and then everybody can go check it out? Like you're gonna do the
Sure.
trailer in a world.
Yeah, no, I you sure. And thank you. Yeah. This talk at Pulse was called Product and Sales Led Growth, Embrace Both with Scaled CX. And essentially, I was kind of showcasing what happened during and after the pandemic, which was where we saw a lot of these headlines in the press about how sales led growth, which is kind of the incumbent model, was dying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it was the year of product led growth. And literally 6 months later, product led growth was dying. And so, like, you need sales back. And so it's just like, it was just kind of looking at this sort of thinking. And essentially, my talk was about, well, first of all, none of them are going anywhere. They're both incredible strategies, and a business should leverage everything at their disposal to succeed, right? And for your customers, to succeed for your customers, like, you also have to be really ruthless about and
Mm-hmm.
self-aware about what's missing in your models, and like what you might be able to bring to the table that your customers need that you haven't yet, and what does that look like. And so essentially it was like looking at, all right, where do these things, like, what are the strengths of both these models, and what are the gaps, and essentially saying that, hey, Scaled CX, which is the name of my team, which comprises of essentially all of the engines you can think of that could scale CS, right? Whether that's education, digital success, production, like all in-house, so on and so forth. The idea was, look, we can add something to these models on the
Yeah.
CX side that don't exist, right? And essentially that's the talk, and it kind of goes through, well, what are those things? Like, where do these models succeed, where do they fall short, and what do we introduce into the mix?
It's so great because you give some actual practical example. There's a lot of talks out there where you're like, okay, great, now what? But actually, if you go look at the slides and look at what you presented, it's like, okay, well, there's some actual like shit I can go do, which is great.
Thank you. And I consider that the highest compliment, right?
Uh-huh.
It's like talking to practitioners, people who do things every
Yeah.
day, and not really just giving a TED talk with vagaries that don't result in anything actionable, right? And that's, I think, I'd love to hear that. Thank you. High compliment. And I think that's what we strive to do in digital success, and on our teams, is to make sure that the things that we're putting out there are actually useful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully that carries through, and
Well,
in how we do talks too.
yeah, exactly. Well, in that spirit of tangible kind of examples, your team at Miro. By the way, I love that you have global in your title because there it's a big distinction, right? And
Mhm.
there's a big tendency to kind of be very regional focused and then forget about the rest. But um,
Yeah,
anyway, that's a tangent. That's another thing altogether.
that's a good point though.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, would you? What's the state of your team? Because I know you've been building like crazy, and you've hired some very cool roles. I've seen over the past year or so that you've hired some really interesting roles into your team, and maybe in way you're building things in ways that I don't think a lot of other people are really thinking about building this. So would you give us kind of a roadmap?
Sure. Of the roles specifically on the team, programs, or
Yeah, of the team structure
yeah.
or kind of how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think leave room for it to evolve organically is one thing I'll say as a caveat, right? Before we kind of
Yeah.
go into detailing this out, because this worked in my current context in Miro, right? And it may or may not, you're like, your
Yeah.
mileage may vary, essentially, is what I'm saying, right? And again, like,
Of
so will mine,
course, yeah.
at a previous company, future company, so on. So I think what has worked really well for us is, high level. We have essentially, we're the scaled customer experience team. We have three major streams or pillars. We have scaled education, scaled production, and then digital success. Um, all global. We look after everybody. So, whether you're a freemium trial user or you are our largest customer, like we take care of you, right? And that's essentially been our
Mm-hmm.
philosophy from the very beginning, when we started as primarily an education team, and so kind of started it as education, built from there. We've got production, digital success, and I think the key roles on the education side are our learning experience designers, which is pretty common in education. We've got
Mm-hmm.
facilitators slash coaches slash consultant role, which is also pretty common. And we have essentially we run our own help center as well. So we've got technical writers that take care of the help center content. So those are our education team roles. We have a production team, which really functions as sort of a shared service between both teams. It's all in-house. Our secret sauce is really our content and the delight that comes through primarily in our videos and the beautiful assets that team creates.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, we've got multimedia designers, and we've got essentially in-app, almost like product managers within that team, although we don't call them such. They're almost like an evolution or like a hybrid between a learning experience designer and a product manager type role.
Mm-hmm.
We take care of our in-app experiences,
Yeah.
right? Whether that's sort of guided tutorials or whether that's our short form robust learning center in the app. And so that's kind of our second stream. And then our digital success team is program managers. So they take care of that happy path journey. They take care of the essentially the risk journey, right? So if you veer off path. And then we've got some program managers across the team that are looking at other things like localization and distribution and things like that. So for us, this is something we've built like brick by brick over the last 3 years, and we really every single role on the team, like to me, I feel like is 5 roles, right?
Yeah.
It's just, and that's how it should feel when you're building intentionally and when you're really responding to the needs of your customers. That's what it's going to feel like.
Yeah.
And so that's just how we built it.
Yeah, I love those those three kind of segmentations, and I guess a couple of follow-ups. You have these program managers in the digital customer success team, and my my assumption is that they're really looking after kind of journeys, building out certain things, working on probably projects related to flows and things like that. I'm guessing there's a lot of like cross-functional work within your teams to get some of the right assets in place and the right all that kind of stuff. But at what point do you transition a custom just engagedly to like maybe engaging, like proactively reaching out, and who does that within Miro? Like, is there proactive engagement with the customer?
Great question.
When something goes awry, or
yeah, absolutely. So we do have a skilled success team as well. That is essentially it's a segment powered by our digital journey with proactive calls to action, and CSFs get involved that way. And that's something obviously you don't have to have a segment for. You can do this across your entire CS model. What's interesting too is you can do this outside of CS. So you can do this when you start to get really interesting indications for a renewals team, for your AE buddy in sales. You can do this when there's interesting things that are coming in that you want your product managers to know about, right? Maybe you launched a new feature, went to market with a new feature, you did it in a scaled way, you're starting to get some interesting buzz from your customers, and you want to alert product managers who may want to speak to customers, right? There's just a lot of ways, I think, to think about this concept that we have in CS of like, hey, how do we do this proactive engagement on the CS side? Now think beyond CS. How about we do it across the organization and pull in, a different lens for the customer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. Are you tech stack wise? I think you're a Gainsight house, right?
We are, yes.
Yeah. And do you use PX for in? Are you a Pendo? Like, what's your in-app stuff looking like these days?
It's all custom. Yeah. Our in-app stuff is all custom right now. Yeah. And not to say that we're not poking around and looking at other things, but If you look at our learning center, we actually have this amazing product team that we get to work with on a regular basis to sort
Yeah.
of enhance, maintain, and that in-app full-on learning center that we
Hmm.
have like alongside them. So it's been really amazing. And then also outside of that particular surface, we do a ton of things, with our various product teams in app. So it's one of those things where it's like, ooh, custom, that's a lot, but it is a lot. If you actually look at the product
Yeah.
inside the app, it kind of allows you to do quite a bit without leaving a Miro board and kind of getting exactly what you need
Hmm.
when you need it. And so, I mean, it works for us, but again, your mileage may vary, but we're very lucky though. I mean, our team, this is one of the things I think is so special about our team. And really it's like special about Miro is that we get to work with folks cross-functionally in a way that I've never seen. It sounds so
Yeah.
cheesy, but like in a way I've never seen done at other organizations, which is why I kind of started our whole conversation with
Hmm.
like, this is all about culture, right? It just depends on if your culture is set up
Hmm.
to help you succeed in this way. You're going to be able to get something a little bit controversial off the ground, which, like, let's face it, sometimes digital success can be. And so I think like in app, we work really closely with our product teams. We've got amazing relationship with our data analytics teams, with our operations teams. Like these are, I mean, I don't even think of them as like separate teams. Like they're our team, right? And that's just how closely we work together. And I think without these relationships, like you're just not going to be able to do a lot. So it's just crucial, I think. But yeah.
Um, I post I posted not too long ago about the fact that I think, let's just call it digital CS, however you're structured around digital CS, but the function of digital CS is probably the function with the most number of variables
Oh my gosh, so true.
within an org. Because of what you were highlighting, right? I mean, it is truly different within
Yeah.
every company, but then you've got a different tech stack, you've got data everywhere, you've got different
Hmm.
roles, you're working cross, like there's just the amount of variables that you navigate in this role is not for the faint of heart. And so kudos to you for being able to operate that way. Obviously, I think it sounds like Miro culture has definitely you know helped facilitate some of those things in a way that's productive. But that's really cool,
Thank you.
that's in house, because I think to your point too, Miro is such a unique product that if you want to surface that in-app kind of guidance and things like that, I would say it almost has to be like a
Yeah.
custom built kind of
Yeah.
thing, because it is very, 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 the tool itself is rich. By that nature, you need kind of a rich in-app guidance.
Yeah, and it's gonna need to be really sort of elegant in the flow of work, right? Because our infinite canvas, and kind of how hyper collaborative our product is, I think if we were layering too much on top of it, it's like the whole
Mm-hmm.
square, like peg round hole situation where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just not, it's going to feel clunky. It's going to impact the user experience. And so just flowing those things together in a way that makes sense, having, I think we were getting anything off the shelf, you're sort of, you're pushed into kind of their model of what an artifact
Mm-hmm.
inside of a product should look and feel like, or even what the
Mm-hmm.
content type is. And I think we have a lot more flexibility in this case to make it a lot more fluid when we're doing it with our product teams and trying to get to a specific outcome that isn't getting in the way of them doing their work, right? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
productivity software, right? Ultimately, we don't want to impact that. And I think the nice thing doing it this way too is that we can evolve as the product does,
Yeah.
right? Like those experiences that we create can evolve as the product does. And because primarily that experience is like a customer education experience in the product, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to be almost
Yeah.
undetectable, right? You don't want to be an annoying like pop up in the face of a user who's trying to accomplish a critical task by their next
I was
meeting.
gonna say, like, I've used Miro in screen share mode in the middle of a meeting with, like, 20 expensive people on the call. The last thing I would want to have is for there to be a pop-up that goes, "Hey, it looks like you're trying to do this."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that there's just so much of that you'll learn as you go through when you're doing this stuff too. Like no matter how much you've done in-app, like I feel like every time I've done in-app in any product, I learn like a million
Hmm.
things that and think like, oh, everything we've ever done before was wrong, right? So I think it's just important to sort of follow along and learn as your, as your customers and your users
Put
experience your
yourself in those
product.
shoes too. I think a lot of us are afraid to kind of like have the
Yeah.
customer experience firsthand. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And like knowing that it changes, right? We spent a lot of time, let's say on onboarding
mm,
3 quarters ago, and then we're like, oh, we're done. And then we move on and we
hmm
don't come back to it for a year. And in that time, the product changes significantly, or, XYZ things happen and your experience is not like you need to go back to that experience. You need to rethink that experience. So I think just constantly iterating and experimenting and learning and changing that experience so that it's, again, always helping the customer achieve their
yeah,
outcomes. That's the, I think that's the key.
it is indeed. Well,
All these simple things,
it
like we know these things, right? But
it's very
like, do we do them
simple,
in
but you put
practice?
them together and it becomes complex all of a sudden.
Simple, simple, not easy, my
That's
friend.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. We kind of start to round down. I'd like to get a sense for what you're paying attention to, what's in your content diet that you might want to share with folks out there.
I am really riding the Substack train
Yeah.
these days. I am living for some of the most incredible Substacks that I have seen out there. It's all practitioners that are doing the work on a regular basis. So you're getting advice from people who have rolled up their
Mm,
sleeves, done a thing, and either succeeded wildly or failed
hmm
miserably. And they're both equally amazing learning. So I'll send you a couple of those Substacks. I also have been reading Shane Parrish's new book, Clear Thinking. I'm a big, big fan of
hmm
structured thinking and frameworks to a certain point. And,
Yeah.
so I like that's what I'm reading at the moment.
Yeah.
But I'll have to get you a better list. I just have
That's
to like
cool.
open my things and get you like a list of stuff. What
Subs
about you?
Substack's a real yeah. Oh,
I know I'm not supposed to be
um,
interviewing you, but I'm going to start. Give
no.
me some things.
Yeah, give you some things. You know, it's pretty varied. I tend to um I tend to use like LinkedIn and stuff as a way to just, even using LinkedIn as a search engine is
Mm,
crazy powerful because there's people that have posted on there, and it just kind of disappears until it doesn't.
yeah.
Um, but there's some totally unrelated stuff. Attention, like there's this guy, I think his name's Mark Williams. He does a podcast called LinkedIn Formed, and it's all about LinkedIn, like all the
Nice.
stuff that's happening on LinkedIn and whatnot, which is super cool. I'm an Atomic Habits
Yes.
guy, so I definitely love
Yeah.
that. And I've been there's one area where, or there's a digital CS Slack community that Marie Lunny started not long ago, that's starting to get some
Oh
traction,
yeah.
that I've been in, called DCS Connect, which has been cool. But I really like your thing on Substack, because I think that's a very worldy kind of place to get some really really good insights. I don't think that's super mainstream.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Reddit of professionalism, I think.
I think it's getting there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like everyone's starting a Substack. I'm gonna do a reading list Substack to start just to get back into the rhythm of writing. I used to write all the time
hmm
about the work that I was doing, and I don't really do that anymore. And it's very 90s to me. Like it reminds me of when Live Journal. It's obviously much slicker than that now,
Sure.
and like people have legitimate businesses on here. But like it reminds me of that era
hmm
when we were all writing about the stuff that we were working on, and it was a little bit more of a hodgepodge. It was sort of like thoughts or notes from the field, and like not everything was like the super polished thing.
Yeah.
It was very much like a practitioner's notebook, and I kind of like really love that feel. I hope they don't lose it. But I'll send you
Yes,
some of
please.
my favorite Substacks, because there's a lot of these folks in SaaS who are talking about like what's next for
Yeah.
PLG, what's next for
hmm
SLG, what's product led sales, and like and I think like what I'm trying to also make sure there's a space for is having that same discussion around digital CS, around
hmm
customer education, across all of these things that we do to scale CX, because that is and beyond, because that is what
Yeah.
we need to be. doing as practitioners, right? And you're doing it with this podcast, which I
And
love.
it's so important what you said about paying attention to kind of other places, right? Like I've had a few guests that say, hey, look, my focus has been completely on the economy and where we're going because I want to know where the money is. And, I think the focus on kind of product strategy and the future of SaaS and those kinds of, that's why I like SaaStr and all those kinds of things. It's very easy to stay in the bubble. And maybe not so obvious, where to go to not be in the bubble.
No, for sure. One of our leaders at Miro, who's fabulous, our CFO always says like you have to like actively try to break that inertia, right? And it's so true. Like we tend to get into this like zone as workers, humans, practitioners, what have you, where we're like, you're just kind of going through the motion or you're doing the thing that has always led to success, but we are all working in times where we're defining new things, and like success is kind of uncharted, and so you have to do that. And so I love these types of places where you can see how people are thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so much value in that like metacognition. So I love Substack for that.
Metacognition. That's real good. Are there, you shouted out your CFO just now, but are there people that are doing cool things in digital that you might want to shout out as well?
Oh my gosh, there's so many people. I feel like I'm so bad with like on the spot book lists and
I am right there with
names.
you.
So
Yeah.
it's gonna sound like a terrible person. It's another thing I'm gonna have to get you a list of. There's so many cool people. There's a meetup that happens once a month for digital success that you're probably on. I think Sam from where are we at here? Like Monday.com started it.
Oh yeah.
And it's like a pretty cool meetup of yeah, I think you're on that one. Like and I think it's lovely because of the way that like they sort of she drives the agenda and kind of sends out the recording and the next steps and the show notes. It's almost like I don't know, it's almost like its own thing, and it's a really cool community. It's just folks that get together once a month, and I haven't been in a little bit, but they just talk about, hey, what are the tactics that are working for you? What are the tactics that aren't working? And like we kind of just, when I was going, we were trading back and forth and trying different things and seeing what would stick. And this was a while ago. It was like early days when we were just getting digital off the ground. And my team goes, my digital team goes, so they report.
Oh, that's
back.
great.
And yeah,
that's
which
cool.
is great. Yeah. But there's a lot of cool people doing great things. And I also want to shout out the people in customer education who I think are doing a lot of scaling that the DCS teams like rely on, right? So, I mean, in another simplistic way that I've always talked about digital for folks who aren't familiar is like it is a distribution engine for customer education, right? I mean, and if you just define customer education beyond like an old school definition of customer education, like it starts to make sense that those two would live together and live in the same portfolio and like in the same department and team. And I think both, like I'm starting to see a lot of leaders, like when I started this journey, like nobody was really doing that. And now I'm starting to see a lot of leaders who are like, oh, why aren't these two things together?
They should be. Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Cool. Well, we are unfortunately painfully and sadly out of time. And I feel, I know, super fast. I feel like we could go on forever, but where can the good people of Digital CS find you and you say hi, send you gift cards?
I love that. The coffee, like coffee beans. So I'm on
where
LinkedIn.
Can people send you coffee?
I know, right? I'm on LinkedIn. I used to be on Twitter, but now I guess I'm on Threads. So you can find me at Dee Kapila. You can also find my Substack, I guess, at deekapila.substack.com. So that's DEEKAPILA and at whatever the thing is I just mentioned.
Cool. I will link both of those things in the description. I thank you for joining. It's been awesome. You wealth of information and energy and positivity. It's awesome what you're building over at Miro, and I can't wait to see where that goes.
Right back at you. Thank you so much for having me. Love the podcast. We should continue to chat as we both build cool next things.
Yeah. And grab some breakfast tacos.
Yes, breakfast tacos. Always breakfast tacos. Thank you, my friend.
Cool. See ya. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Digital Customer Success Podcast. If you like what we're doing, consider leaving us a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps us to grow and to provide value to a broader audience. You can view the Digital Customer Success definition word map and get more details about the show at digitalcustomersuccess.com. My name is Alex Turkovich. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.